Hey guys, what is going on? It is me, BakuriBox12 here, and welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God ranking video. It's been a while since I've done one of these, mainly because, well, there aren't that many left I can do. Nonetheless, today we're going to be looking at some event gods. Those larger-than-life enemies that Oryx spawns in on his command when a certain number of quest gods are destroyed. They're more intense than regular gods, but still not quite at the level of dungeon boss. I'll be looking at the 12 main event gods today, placing them in order from my least to most favorite, which means that I'll be excluding any seasonal or annual special event bosses that show up, like the Permafrost Lord or Biff the Buff Bunny, mainly because I don't have any footage of them, but I also kind of want to stick to the originals. Let's get started. Number 12, the Killer Bee Nest. This is a lot of people's least favorite event in the game, as evident by no one ever completing it, and unfortunately it falls prey to its own vicious cycle. The reason that people don't like fighting it so much is because it takes a long time and you need a bunch of people. But because it takes so long to complete, hardly anyone shows up, and then it takes longer anyway. And with how much is going on here, you kind of need a lot of people for it to be enjoyable. You've got nest colonies with this constant attack. They spawn bees, guardians that heal the colonies, a bunch of colonies that you have to kill and repeat that process, tiny projectiles that are hard to see because you got this humongous, flashy set piece behind it. Very harsh on the eyes, I find. That might just be me, but whew, man, that ground is distracting. Doesn't bother me in El Dorado, but for some reason, here it does. I don't know. I do like the part when the giant behemoths come out. That feels like a genuine fight. But it's the build-up to that fight that I think deters so many players. Nobody wants to sit through it, and because it's not even mandatory to close the realm, even less people now find an obligation to do it. Sprites are pretty cool, though. Number 11. Avatar of the Forgotten King. Seeing as how this enemy drops the Shatter's portal, it's only fitting for it to have a more elaborate fight. The Avatar is a giant skull that rests in the middle of its very distinct set piece, reminiscent of the Shatter's itself, and has quite the profuse number of phases. It does teeter on the longer side like the Killer Bee Nest, and there is a lot of standing around, but there is a lot going on here, and on variety alone, I find it to be quite a nice spectacle. I'm just glad it's way easier to kill than when it first came out, good lord. Number 10. The Jade and Garnet statues. A pair of nearly identical, very detailed statues on what has to be one of my favorite set pieces in the game, whose purpose is to guard the entrance to the Mountain Temple. On lore and theming alone, I find this to be a very captivating event boss. And as a ninja player, the Kageboshi white bag that they can drop is something that I fancy. However, it is a pretty basic fight when you boil it down, because the statues like to charge the player closest to them, releasing a ton of damage in their wake. But when you anticipate where they're going to move next, you can bait their movements into whatever direction you want, attack them, and repeat. It's actually kinda easy when you break it down like that, but it still has that hint of danger and very cool premise behind it. Number 9. The Pentaract. This is actually one of the few fights in the game that I prefer before it had its revamp. When pets took over the realm, event gods were getting absolutely destroyed by groups of people. So to compensate for that, HP scaling was added, as well as various invulnerability phases. And in the case of the Pentaract, not only do the towers frequently become invulnerable, but they also shoot out their own stunning attacks. So any melees unlucky enough to get hit by these when trying to get their soulbound on each tower, they will have to back up and wait, risking not only their soulbound opportunity, which granted isn't a big deal anymore, but also lose time on dealing damage to the tower. But I get why it was done, and it is still a lot of fun to try and kill all 5 towers before they respawn. Number 8. Ghost Ship. I remember being terrified of this enemy when it first came out, because you have to get so close to it to land any hits. But of course, by doing that, you're put right in the center of danger. And some of those cannonball shots and bombs, they do a ton of damage. But the scariest part for me as a new player was that once the rain clouds came out and they were shooting lightning, if you wanted to get back into the fight, you had to make a mad dash and brute force your way through the beach specters and rain clouds, resulting in some pretty substantial damage from someone playing on an unmaxed wizard before pets were a thing. Granted, things have changed and it's not nearly as difficult as it once was. However, it does still contain that same atmosphere of ocean warfare. It's moderately paced with some cool attacks, and while I don't play it with the sounds on, I know for a fact that the Ghost Ship is releasing that echoey crunch sound that I love so much. Number 7. The Rock Dragon. Probably my most terrifying event boss to fight. I can never quite tell where he's gonna go next, whether he'll just randomly decide to hover on over to me and gun me down, and those confusing Rock Dragon bats are just a delight. But I gotta give it props for being a fairly intimidating battle. Not a lot of things are like that in the game anymore, and so it's nice to see something from a few years ago still give me a scare. The set piece itself is really cool. It's got that arena vibe, and the Rock Dragon itself isn't so much a dragon as much as it is like a snake, or you can think of it as a giant centipede even. You have to destroy each section of its body before its eyeball runs amok, shooting you with its ray gun. And it drops the ray katana, which I love, so that's a bonus. Number 6. Grand Sphinx. The older event gods are home to some of my favorites. I remember when I really started getting into Realm, the exciting part about the Sphinx wasn't really the battle, but seeing whether or not it would drop not only a Tomb of the Ancients, which was my life source many years ago. I was always itching for another chance at life and Ring of the Pyramid, but it was also that rare yet hopeful opportunity that you could get the Helm of the Juggernaut, something that to this day is still one of the most incredible drops you can get. And of course, the fight itself is really fun too. It can get a little crazy with the horrid Reapers running around everywhere, screaming their heads off. I was always worried one was gonna sit on me. But the Grand Sphinx follows a very basic attack pattern. She never does anything too extreme or out of the ordinary, but watching those giant yellow blinding Z-shots come out is something I will never get tired of. Number 5. Cube God. It's as simple as it gets. You're literally fighting colored boxes, and yet it works. That giant dark blue cube is fun to look at. Is that just me? Like, I could just stare at that thing and be like, yeah, look at that. That's nice. I guess sometimes less is more. It's the only explanation I can think of. Regardless, this is one of those event gods that's been around since the beginning, or at least very close to that. It was at a time where you could just put an enemy on screen, make him wobble in place, have one basic attack, and then surround him with minions, and then tell the players, yeah, try and fight him. And that was all you needed. It truly was a simpler time. I think the most exciting part about the Cube God is trying to overcome the chaos. You have so many different types of enemy cubes to deal with, one of which slows you. That's a pain. But when you carve your way through all of them, whether in a group or not, using trees to duck behind, and you get right next to the cube, and you land a few hits on him, and then crawl back to safety, or if you're on a knight, try and chain stun him. That was one of the most exciting things you could do, and it still feels great. It also drops the Dirk of Cronus, which I still think is the prettiest item in the game for me. Just needs a bit of a buff. Considering how rare it is, I think it should be the best, but yeah, maybe one day. Number 4. The Hermit God. Props to the sprite art. I always really enjoyed how it looked like the tentacles were coming out of the water and moving around. And in general, blue and orange is a pretty nice color combination, so it's very nice on the eyes. For the first half of the fight, you have to destroy all of the above ground tentacles, and only then will the Hermit God reveal itself, releasing an ink spray, blinding anyone caught within. Meanwhile, you have all these little hermit crabs running around paralyzing you. These things utterly destroyed me when I first started fighting it. Even now, without proper healing, the paralysis can stack. But Hermit Gods are always a joy to fight. I don't know what it is. It's not like they're super complex or anything or have some crazy attack. But I always look forward to one when it spawns in. Probably because it can drop a jug, now that I think about it. But overall, it's a satisfying kill. It's also the only boss that drops more than one bag normally. It's weird. Number 3. Skull Shrine. Very similar to the Cube God in its structure. Event God sits in the middle, although completely stationary this time. Minions surround it, and you gotta try your hardest to weave in between all the minions, actually make contact with the Skull Shrine, and then get out before it shoots you down with its own shotgun. Which, at the speed that it fires, easier said than done. I remember losing a maxed out ninja to this thing. Ran in, got a couple hits in, but wasn't able to get out in time before the Skull Shrine and all of its minions exploded me. Skull Shrine's a terrifying creature when you give it the opportunity, but he's also a flaming skull, so that's pretty rad. Number 2. The Lost Sentry. You can look at this as a direct upgrade from the Avatar of the Forgotten King. Both of them drop endgame dungeons, have a ton of phases, and are meant to be very difficult. The difference here is that the Sentry cranks it up to 11. There are a lot of bullets to dodge here. Some at different amplitudes, other at different speeds, multiple status effects. You can hardly tell that this thing even has phases because they so seamlessly transition into one another. It really just feels like one long phase that changes slightly every now and then. And that's kind of why it's so fun. It feels like this immaculate test of endurance. You're given all these different patterns and shots to avoid. Meanwhile, the Reaper is going around, giving you a good scare every time he comes into frame, but it always remains controlled and isolated within its own little ring, allowing you to focus on everything being thrown at you and overcome it strategically. I'm not very good at it, but I know that with proper dedication and practice, it's something that can be very fulfillingly mastered, and that's something that I think every boss should be. But my number 1 favorite event god, for one reason or another, is the Lord of the Lost Lands. Since day one, I've loved his sprite, especially his angry one where he turns all red. Don't know why, just gets me. He runs around with these very powerful but fun to dodge attacks, goes into hibernation inside his crystal phase, sends out a bunch of protection crystals around him, destroy them without getting hit, make him vulnerable again. The slowing minions are a bit annoying, I will admit, but the Knights of the Lost Lands, Those guys are pretty sweet, if only for, once again, the sprite work. And of course, his white bag drop is the Shield of Ogmer, which I've said many times now, is my favorite white bag in the game. All in all, he's a very profound-looking king taken from his throne, removed from his homeland, and you can feel that strength and anger throughout his fight. With that being said, those are my favorite Realm of the Mad God event gods, all ranked from least to greatest. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, don't forget to check out the next episode whenever I post it, which will probably be soon. Alright. See ya.